This episode is brought to you by Cora tampons. Made from 100% certified organic cotton, every Cora product is made with pure and ethically sourced ingredients. No pesticides, no fragrances, no bleach, no BPA, no synthetic materials. If you're still using conventional tampons, we need to talk. You don't even know what you're putting inside of your vagina. Head over to fertilityfriday.com/Cora today, and you'll receive your first month supply free of charge. This is the Fertility Friday podcast, episode number 138. Welcome to the 138th episode of the Fertility Friday podcast. Thank you for joining me today. I'm Lisa from fertilityfriday.com, and this is your source for information about the fertility awareness method and all things fertility. So I'm really excited to share today's episode with you. Today is a special episode because I'm interviewing a member of the Fertility Friday community. I really enjoyed being able to do that from time to time and to share with you really the experience of a real woman. I know a lot of you are going to be able to relate to Andrea's experience and learn something from what she went through. And so Andrea is on the show to share a little bit about her experience after coming off of the pill, expecting for her period to return right away and finding 4 years later that it still hadn't come back. And so it's a really powerful episode because Andrea shares what she did over the course of that 4-year period and how this affected her and ultimately what she did to encourage her period to return. And so if you're new to the show and you are looking for episodes specifically about the fertility awareness method, you're looking to learn a little bit more in depth about how to chart, I would encourage you to head over to fertilityfriday.com/fertility awareness. So I've created a separate tab where I actually list out all of the fertility awareness specific episodes. And if you have been charting your cycles, but you're having a difficult time, if your cycles are not following the kind of quote unquote normal parameters, or if you're having trouble understanding your mucus or just trying to figure out what is happening in your cycle and what it could be indicative of from a holistic perspective, I would love to support you in that. So if you're looking to go deeper, I have a number of programs that I offer. So you can check those out at fertilityfriday.com/work-with-me. And if you have questions about my programs, you can certainly set up a free 15-minute consultation with me, and we can talk more about those program offerings. And before we hop into today's show, I just want to take a moment to thank today's sponsor, Cora tampons. All right, ladies. So today I want to talk about yeast infections, itchiness, and general vaginal irritation. I know, right? Like super fun topics to talk about. But I've actually received a lot of requests to talk about that on an entire podcast episode, which I will be doing later on in the year. But for now, I just want to talk about one of the reasons why you may be experiencing or may have experienced some of these issues in the past. One of the things that you need to know about regular pads and tampons is that, well, first of all, they're made from synthetic materials, man-made fibers that have a tendency to absorb and kind of hold bacteria and other little nasties that can end up really causing an imbalance of bacteria and all that kind of stuff right there in your vagina. So the first thing is the synthetic materials. But the second thing are the chemicals that these products are treated with. I think one of the first things to note is that non-organic cotton is one of the most heavily sprayed crops imaginable. And in a way, it makes sense because you're not technically eating cotton. So why would they hold back on the chemical pesticide spray? So what's interesting is that many women have noticed that when they switch to 100% organic tampons, that they no longer experience the yeast infections they were experiencing, the itchiness, the irritation, the bacterial overgrowth. And for some women, the chemicals and the toxic compounds in conventional tampons are enough to trigger menstrual cramps. So there are women who've even noticed a change and a shift in their painful periods just by switching menstrual products. So I encourage you to head over to fertilityfriday.com/Cora to take a look at Cora tampons. Cora tampons are made from 100% certified organic cotton. There are no synthetic materials or fibers in the product at all. And to date, there is no research to show that any woman has ever developed something like TSS, so toxic shock syndrome, which is caused by an overgrowth of bacteria when they're using 100% organic cotton. So again, that's fertilityfriday.com/Cora. And when you sign up, you'll actually receive your first month's supply free of charge. So now let's jump back into today's episode. And today I'm very excited to welcome my guest, Andrea Petrus, to the show. Andrea reached out to me back in November of last year, so 2016, shortly after my episode with Dr. Miranda Naylor aired. So if you didn't tune into that episode, I recorded an episode with Dr. Miranda Naylor, who is a medical doctor, but also found herself on the patient end when she came off of hormonal contraceptives and her period didn't return. And so that's a really interesting and important interview for you to listen to, because we talked about a lot of different things, including how to talk to your doctor and to give some insight into why you're not always necessarily getting what the response you would expect or want from your physician. So really helpful. But Andrea reached out to me because she really resonated with Dr. Naylor's story on a personal level, because she too had a similar experience where she came off the pill only to find that her period was totally MIA for a really long time. And so Andrea found herself on a 4-year journey to really figure out what was going on before her period finally returned. And so I invited Andrea on the show to share her journey and to really give some insight into what was happening, what was going on behind the scenes. So thank you so much for being here, Andrea.
It's such a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me.
I'm really excited to have you. And I really appreciate you kind of jumping out of your comfort zone a little bit and sharing your own story with what it was like to come off the pill. And so just to orient the listeners, to give a bit of context and background, would you be able to share just a little bit about your history? So, when did you start taking hormonal contraceptives and how long were you on them, that type of thing?
Okay. So I started the pill, hormonal contraceptives, at the age of 16. I had really bad lower back pain and with my periods, to the point where even with Advil, I couldn't sleep through the night. So I went to the doctor and they put me on the pill, and I was on that same pill nonstop for 12 years. I got off of it at the age of 28 when we wanted to start having a family. And throughout the years, I had asked my OBGYN, should I switch pills? Should I get off the pill? And the standard response was always, well, if it's not broken, don't fix it. Just leave it alone. So I stayed on it until we were ready to start a family. Mm-hmm. And that was my journey with hormonal contraceptive. Did you want me to go into a little bit further until I got my period back?
Well, as you mentioned that, so 12 years, so doing the math, that takes us back to when you were 16, around that, then when you started to take it. Mm-hmm. How soon after you started actually, like you had your first menstruation, how soon after that were you put on the pill?
I got my first period when I was 13 and a half. So, after listening to some of your episodes, I've learned that my cycle was far from being mature. And so it definitely, was only 2.5 years or so of having a period before I started the pill.
Well, and I'm curious about the pain. So I too have experienced menstrual pain, and if anyone, I know a lot of the listeners have also experienced menstrual pain, and it's really just one of those, especially when you're a teenager, if you just don't have a way of coping with it. There's just, unless you are really fortunate enough to be in a place where you have access to functional practitioners who are actually willing to look at that at such a young age, I feel like it's just one of those really common reasons why we end up on the pill. Maybe just go a little bit more into your story and what happened when you stopped taking the pill.
Okay, so stopped taking the pill, nothing happened. Went to the OBGYN after I'd been corresponding with her through email, and she had me come in after 3 months. And she said, okay, well, he's trying to start a family. Let's give it another 3 months and see how your body responds. So this was all back in the end of 2012. And finally in 2013, after no activity, she had me come in and do a vaginal ultrasound. And I had cysts indicating polycystic ovarian syndrome. So that was the diagnosis I had received. And from there, we proceeded to do several rounds of Clomid under her supervision, and nothing happened. And even when she gave me the progesterone for withdrawal bleed, it was a very, very light, quote unquote, period that I got from that. And it was at that point that she sent me over to an infertility clinic to work with a reproductive endocrinologist. So really that whole course of time, absolutely no activity whatsoever except for anything that was drug induced.
Well, and how many times or how many rounds of Clomid did you end up doing at that point?
I believe, this is going back to 2013. I believe I did 3 rounds of Clomid under her supervision. And then when I went to the reproductive endocrinologist, my first round with them was just timed intercourse. So I think they used Clomid, but then they also gave me an injection to ensure that I was ovulating. So that was my first experience there. And then from there, knowing that that didn't work and that we were going to have to do some more, more intense procedures, we kind of paused for a little bit to save up some money. And then we did 4 rounds of IUI and 2 rounds of IVF. And that was all throughout the year of 2014. I actually found out my second IVF failed on December 31st of 2014. So it was
Happy New Year's.
Yeah, Happy New Year's. Yeah, it was one of those nights where I was in my sweatpants on the couch, curled up with my dog and my family. So quiet evening. But that was that, and still no real periods or anything on my own outside of, the drugs that I was doing for that treatment. Following that, I ended up working with an acupuncturist, just only knowing that I had PCOS at that point, working with an acupuncturist for about 6 months and didn't have any signs of progress there either. And it was in August of 2015 that I finally discovered the world of functional medicine and started working with a naturopath, and everything started to change from there. But like you had mentioned in the introduction, it took a long time before my period returned. It was not until November of 2016. So even, over a year of naturopathic medicine treatment before it came back. But it's here and it's been great. It was that first day I just sobbed and sobbed and sobbed with gratefulness and relief. It was a really special day to have that happen. And I've been fortunately having regular cycles since.
Mm-hmm. Well, congratulations. That doesn't seem like it's sufficient enough, but, congratulations on that, because to be honest, it's hard to imagine what you would be feeling after 4 years of no period, because that's about the time frame. Is that right? From when you went off yes, because when you went off the pill, it was about, so I have in my notes, September of 2012. You were 28 at the time, and then it wasn't until 4 years later that your period did return.
It was a very, very difficult 4 years. And I guess when you're on the pill, you don't think about it. But, once I got off, I realized how much having a cycle was a part of my female identity. And I felt very stripped of my womanhood for those 4 years.
It's interesting because I think a lot of the women who are listening can really resonate with that. You don't really think about it too often on a conscious level, well, until after you listen to a couple of episodes of the show. But ultimately, having that monthly cycle is this integral part of my identity as well. And it's so interesting that for all those years you were on the pill and you were able to maintain that identity unbeknownst to you when there was something going on in the background. Looking back now, what I mean, this may not be you may not be able to answer this just given how young you were when you first started taking hormonal contraceptives, but looking back, do you think there were any signs of a possible PCOS back then, or do you think potentially this just developed later on?
I don't remember, going back, I don't remember any signs of PCOS. And getting a little bit further into my story and naturopathic medicine, I ended up being diagnosed with Hashimoto's thyroiditis, along with HPA axis dysregulation, also known as adrenal fatigue. And so, looking back and learning what I've learned from listening to your podcast and not having let my cycle mature, I had cysts in my ovaries, but I didn't have some of the other symptoms. Like when I did the sugar drink, I didn't show as having insulin resistance, and I wasn't overweight at that point in time. Now with my thyroid issue, there have been some weight fluctuations, but at that point I had a healthy weight. So I didn't have a lot of the other symptoms. So I'm even wondering at this point if it really was PCOS or if it was just, my cycle needed to mature or we needed to work on my thyroid. So I don't even truly know. And maybe I've also heard other podcasts where people who have PCOS don't present typical symptoms and you have to do some extra investigation. So maybe that's the category I fall into. But, right now, at least I know that we're working on my HPA axis or my adrenals and my thyroid. And so that's been huge.
I think it's really important. That's a really important point because it's something, actually, I recorded another interview this morning with Dr. Pamela Frank, and she's a naturopath in Toronto. And she shared her perspective as to why PCOS can go undiagnosed in so many cases. Now, from my perspective as a fertility awareness educator, it's quite obvious to me if a woman, say, isn't ovulating, right? That's like, if that's not happening, that's the most obvious thing in the chart. You can't miss that, especially so if you're watching for it, you can't miss it. And so from my perspective, some of those other peripheral signs, which would have more of a central role in diagnosing PCOS from perhaps a different practitioner's perspective, such as weight gain or even the cysts on the ovaries, you had them, so that made the diagnosis fairly straightforward. But had you not had those cysts, perhaps that wouldn't have been as easily identified. And also the insulin resistance piece. So it's really important to have as much information as you can about what it is that is PCOS, really, because it's a collection of symptoms, and in order for a diagnosis, you don't need to be overweight. You don't need to actually have cysts on your ovaries, even though it's called polycystic ovary syndrome. And one of the interesting things is there is this coexistence between PCOS and thyroid issues. And so if you identify PCOS, it's always a good idea to check to see if there's kind of that underlying. So all of these things work together. There's no there's no vacuum.
No, and that's something I've learned in this journey is, in the beginning, I just kind of listened to the regular traditional doctors and just was trying to be focused on being a good patient. And it wasn't till later in my journey where I started being my own advocate and doing my own research that I realized your fertility is a sign of your health. And I've heard you refer to it as a fifth vital sign. And it's something that you really need to pay attention to. And it tells you so much about your body in general.
Well, and during that time, I'm sure there were, countless things that you were doing, countless things that you did to obviously try to get your period back, try to have your cycles be ovulatory and regularly. So maybe you could share a little bit about some of the things that you did in the beginning and how that shifted after you started working with your naturopath, coming from a functional perspective.
Mm-hmm. Well, in the beginning, the OBGYN and the infertility doctor, the reproductive endocrinologists, they just said, "Oh, you're a healthy weight. You're your traditional kind of, when you go get your physical, your traditional labs show that you're healthy." So they told me not to worry about anything. So I was a healthy eater pretty much on my own, but I still included at that point dairy and gluten and grains. So they're like, "Oh, you eat your kale, you're good. You don't have to worry about that." And I was only a social drinker, and I didn't smoke or anything. So like, "No, you're really fine. You don't have to do anything." So I didn't shift anything. I used regular hair products, regular makeup, everything. And then as I started getting into the world of naturopathic medicine, that was when, actually, I have to go back and give credit. In 2015, when I started working with my first acupuncturist, she was the one that said, "You have to get off gluten, you have to get off dairy, cut back on the sugar and start living a more natural life." That's when I started going to the farmers to get my meat. I started, investing in organic produce. I started transitioning to natural hair care, natural makeup, natural skincare, natural toothpaste, natural deodorant. And it wasn't all at once. It's definitely been a slow transition. But when I started working with the acupuncturist and then transitioned to a functional medicine doctor or naturopath, they started helping me feel empowered in the process. They started kind of educating me and leading me down the ways that I could continue to educate myself. And there was this whole new world that opened up to me about how to take care of my body, how I could be my own partner in this process and help things along. And I think, learning about those different areas of self-care and nutrition and just things you need to do to heal your body and help it heal itself were huge. And, those were some of the diet and the supplements and using natural products was definitely part of it. And then I'd say the most recent kind of metamorphosis of this journey for me has been probably in the past, I don't know, maybe 4 to 6 months, started working on the emotional and spiritual and mental aspects to this, and focusing on self-care and self-love and kind of working on those things. So it's a truly holistic journey and path that I've been on. And it really wasn't until I started incorporating all of those areas that I started really showing improvement in my health.
Well, yeah, no, I really appreciate you sharing that. And I feel like we're really right-brained. I think it's the right brain. I confuse these things. But we're always looking for the solution, the scientific study, the simple answer. When I was a kid, I really liked and still like math. So I was one of those kids that like really liked math class. And I mean, math class for me was simple to figure out. Like there's a question and there's an answer and you could figure it out, right? Like it's very cut and dry. But I think what's important, especially when you delve into this world and you really start to see how all of the different factors impact your cycle, what I think is most profound when I'm working with clients is for them to really see that all these things that you didn't think were related to your cycle show up right there. So when your brother gets married and you have to go out of town, to go to his wedding, then you see that in your cycle. For those couple days, your temperatures are a little off, and then perhaps your ovulation is a little bit delayed. And then, as soon as you get back home and you're back to your normal routine, bam, you see this pattern resume. And so I feel like those little things really help little by little, as you said, this process of really starting to make these changes and think more importantly, make the connections. So I would love to hear just a little bit more about the second aspect of it, which is what you mentioned, the spiritual aspect of it, the connecting back with yourself. And before I throw it over to you, I think that it's really important to recognize that although it seems like it's this emotional, intangible realm when you start to do those things, it's very specific to help us all manage our stress and manage our state of mind. And these things have very practical and very real, concrete life hormonal implications. So I think sometimes it's easy to discount how important those things are.
Absolutely. Especially if you're very comfortable in that typical kind of Western medicine world. Talking about this sounds a little woo-woo, but it really was the final piece of the puzzle for me. It made a huge difference. And, especially, when you get off the pill and you don't have a period, and then you go through fertility treatments and you aren't successful, it really messes with your emotions. It messes with your confidence. And then having thyroid issues and putting on weight, it really affects your confidence. And so through this entire journey, I've had to really start to focus on, loving myself no matter what. And, just even, and it's been a process, even just in the past few weeks, it's gotten to that point where I feel like I can say I have self-love, that, yeah, I have some extra roles right now that I didn't have for, 30 plus years of my life, but I'm taking the time to take care of me. I'm getting the sleep that I need. I'm feeding myself the high quality food that I need. I'm doing everything I can from a self-care perspective. And however my body responds is however it responds. It's already shown to me that it's miraculous and it can heal. So, that self-love was huge. And we didn't talk about this yet, but coincidentally, and this really affirmed to me the spiritual aspect, I got my period back within 2, maybe 3 weeks of deciding I wanted to make a career change. I had been in a corporate human resources role and decided to make a change into being a professional counselor and to go back. And my dream is to be a holistic therapist and incorporate these aspects that we're talking about now into a kind of a counseling career. And when I decided to make that career change, it felt like getting my period back was a validation that I was aligning myself properly, that these things were happening for me to align me on the correct path for my life, my calling, my journey, how I'm here to contribute and make a difference. So, even if I had been skeptical about the spiritual aspect before that, I think when I got that validation of making that career change and then my cycle appearing, it was very validating and reaffirming. So I think it all makes a difference.
That is incredible. And I mean, some people could hear that and think it's a coincidence, but it did give me chills. It's something that I see a lot in different ways. And I think one of the things that separates the type of work that I do with women from your typical 5-minute appointment with the doctor is that all of, my clients, our appointments are usually, they range between 90 minutes, 60 minutes. And so during those times, we end up talking about a lot of different things. And what often comes up is those questions, those bigger life questions, which is because from my perspective, when I see your cycle, I can see it all laid out. So if you're super stressed out and you hate your job, for example, like I'm not saying you do, but I'm just using that or you did. I'm just saying that using that as an example, but not even hate your job. If you love your job and your boss, you just had a new management change and your boss is kind of a little bit of but it's even that type of stuff, you see it in the chart. So often, even though my client may not bring that up, that might not be the topic of our first meeting or anything like that. I'll look at the chart and, based on what I'm seeing, it looks like there's something going on. So then I ask, what are your stress levels like? What are some of the things that are happening? And then all of this type of thing comes out when exactly what you said, you find yourself not aligned with what you really want to do. And I feel like that in a broader sense is what your menstrual cycle does. And I think when you pay attention to how it responds, not only to your diet and your sleep habits and all of that, but really to what's happening with you emotionally, because that does have an impact on everything. It's just incredible to see when you do figure those things out and have those honest conversations with yourself, because I'm sure it wasn't an easy conversation to have with yourself. I think I want a new career. Let me just go do that.
Yeah. I'm trying to condense 4.5 years of a journey into an hour podcast here. And that career change thing was huge for months. I felt pulled in a different direction, but I didn't even know what. And then when I started kind of thinking that it might be in holistic therapy, the idea of making that leap was incredibly scary. Even now, as a grad student taking these classes, going from being a competent professional in one area to being a newbie, it's overwhelming and it is scary, but you have to take that leap of faith. And I'm so grateful to have a supportive spouse and a supportive family. And that makes such a difference. But oh my gosh, so incredibly scary to make that leap of faith and to take that jump. Not an easy process at all.
No. And I don't want to give the impression to anybody listening that you're going to have an epiphany and then the next day you're going to conceive or everything's all of a sudden amazing and everything's 100% better. But I'm really glad that you shared a little bit about that process, because this decision that you came to and this moment, this aha moment that you had, it didn't just happen out of the blue. It happened after quite a while of contemplation. And arguably you were probably contemplating some of these things on a more of a deeper level here and there for years prior to that. And I feel like that is one of the reasons why I'm so passionate to help women to connect with their cycles, because I really feel, so I've spoken about this on the podcast before and how throughout my life, I've really found that having my periods, having cycles and bleeding every however many days, I found that cyclical nature of our cycles has really helped me throughout the years to stay on track. And it has prevented me from staying in situations that I'm not happy with, because I find that those few days before and the first few days of my period personally are often quite reflective. And so if there's something in my life that's out of alignment, it comes to my attention and I feel on those days, I feel kind of the most uncomfortable. So if I really don't like a job that I'm in, those days really bring it to the top and just, it puts it right in my face. And so if there's something that's bothering me, it's amplified on those days. And I have found that connecting with that and identifying those things have always helped to guide me in the right direction where I really need to be, and prevented me from continuing on in a bad relationship or anything like that. it's probably that has led me to be here right now, right? To follow what it is that I really believe in doing. And so you're not alone in that, Andrea. And I hope that the listeners really take a profound lesson from that, which is that if you think that your body is broken and you think that there's something wrong with you, then you're missing what it is that your body is trying to say to you. If you think about your body as, I mean, your body can't talk in words. So how is your body to communicate with you? Well, I look at the menstrual cycle as one of those communication tools. That's why I refer to it as a vital sign. And so as such, if you can instead think of your body as telling you a message and try to interpret it and listen, then things can shift. So I would love for you, Andrea, to talk just a little bit about the feelings that you've had over the years. I know before we jumped into our conversation, you had mentioned that for a long time, you just felt like your body was broken. And so I'd love for you to talk a little bit about what that was like.
Oh, the emotional journey part of this. Wow. First of all, when you're talking right then, listeners didn't see, I just kept nodding. Yes, yes, yes. It's all so true. Your body is always trying to communicate to you. And it's so important. I've learned personally to take the time to listen because it does guide you in the right direction. And the emotional journey, let's see. First, not getting a period when everyone else was having one was very difficult. And then going through, I knew a few friends that had gotten pregnant successfully off of Clomid. So when that happened, I was like, this is going to be it. And that didn't work. So another round of feeling broken. And then the IUI, 4 IUI rounds, feeling broken, finishing the 2 IVF rounds, feeling broken. That was a real low. And the doctors were ready to put me through a 3rd IVF round. And that was when I finally found my voice in the process. Instead of getting, whisked through, more rounds of injections and testing and procedures, I said, I got to stop. I got to heal my body. If I'm going to get pregnant, I don't want to feel like this. This is going to be a special time in my life and I want to feel whole and healed. So which is why I went the acupuncture route, because at that point I didn't even know about the functional medicine world. It was when I started, being my own advocate and taking responsibility for my part in this process that I started to feel empowered. And it was still difficult with pregnancy, over these past 4.5 years at this point, pregnancy announcements coming left and right, people just getting pregnant on their first try. And, I learned it's huge to just let it out. Every time I felt sad, I went and cried, and it was so therapeutic to let out those tears and to grieve. And my husband would be great and hold me and support me. And he always knew just what to say. He filled that glass half full every time. I'm so grateful to him. But just every time, I feel like, sorry, I'm getting a little tangential on the question, but every time just really feeling those emotions and then figuring out how to take that next emotional step. In the beginning, it was with a lot of books and you've had podcasts on these kind of topics before. And I've listened to other podcast episodes about, working on that self-love and that self-care and being there for yourself and listening, feeling and listening. Did I even answer your question?
Yeah, no, you did.
Okay.
You did.
There's so many, you asked that question and there's just so many emotions and thoughts that flooded my head. It's kind of hard to articulate 4 years of everything like this, but really, listening and feeling and seeking kind of great resources to how you can push yourself to that next emotional level.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I think that I feel like a lot of listeners are resonating with that. And there's so many pieces of your story that ring true in so many different ways. So in my conception group, exactly what you were talking about with dealing with the constant barrage of baby announcements, pregnancy announcements, baby pictures, and all of those different things, it can really take a toll on you. And it's something that I really believe that if you find yourself feeling that way, it's important to honor those feelings But it's also important to look at what you can control in the situation. So although you can't control, every second friend getting pregnant on their first try, what you can control is your Facebook feed, and you can delete the app from your phone so that you don't, torture yourself unless you feel to. But to have a little bit more control over some of those things, because otherwise it can just, you're just kind of a sitting duck for all of this stuff that's coming at you, which can make it really hard.
Yeah, social media has been a blessing and a curse. When I went through IVF, I deleted the Facebook app. I really did not go on. It was too difficult. But since that period, I've found it to be a resource as well. I still see the pregnancy announcements of my friends, and I kind of grieve each time. But I've also used Facebook to find support. I've joined several private groups that have been an immense source of inspiration and support and information and knowledge sharing, and I found real community there. So it's a double-edged sword, but I have to focus on all the great things that it's brought me. But you have to listen to yourself. If Instagram and Facebook are too much, make that decision. Take a break. It's okay. The people that you really need to have in your life will still communicate with you.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And so for the listeners who want to hear a little bit more of what are some of the changes that you made, what are some of those more tangible, so getting back into the realm of, you mentioned earlier that before there were certain things that you were eating regularly. You had mentioned that you cut out dairy and gluten. I think you said gluten, and there was something else as well. Sugar. Yeah. So maybe take us through a little bit of some of those more practical changes that you made and what you felt made a big difference from that perspective.
Okay. So actionable items. I love these kinds of takeaways. I cut out caffeine. That was by far the hardest. It was a horrible week after I gave up my morning coffee. You just have to find replacements for it and deal with the withdrawal symptoms. I basically made the decision to cut out drinking altogether. I wanted to do everything I could to support my liver. And honestly, I don't miss it, just because I think even if I had, one glass of wine, I would get hungover the next day. So it's really okay not having drinking in my life. So I gave up alcohol, gave up caffeine. I gave up gluten. For a long time, I gave up all grains. Recently, I have reincorporated some rice that I make sure to soak and sprout beforehand, just as a good carb source to support my thyroid and adrenals. So I cut out the grains. Sugar is very inflammatory. I think people hear that all over the place. So I think that doesn't need further explanation. So I do have treats once in a while, but I really try to keep the processed sugars out of my life. I do okay with fruits and things like that. So I've kept that. Let's see, what else did I cut out? I don't do well with nuts. So I had to listen to my body and cut out nuts and other legumes. So I don't do beans anymore. I do miss hummus sometimes, but it's part of life. Let's see, talked about the dairy. So I gave that up. I do a little bit of ghee here and there, but had to listen to my body and give up dairy as well. So those are kind of the dietary things. Actionable steps in terms of working with medical professionals. I can't recommend a naturopath or functional medicine or integrative medical doctor enough. They run the appropriate labs. They can help walk you through the process, and they're going to tweak your supplements to what you need. Do not self-supplement. That is just, I've learned that so much. You really need to work with a professional in that capacity. In addition to that, I also saw a chiropractor once, and I think that made a big difference, and not just a traditional one. I specifically was able to work with an upper cervical care chiropractor, and it was an adjustment that I got in July of this past year, about 4 months before getting my cycle back. And he talked about when he made that adjustment, he would let my spinal cord finally communicate with my pituitary, which, as we know, is part of the HPA axis. So I think chiropractic adjustment doesn't really get a lot of attention in this world. And that, I think, made an impact for me. And then I did start seeing a different acupuncturist. I'm with my second acupuncturist now, and I felt that he's really good. I think you have to find a good acupuncturist. There's definitely a difference between the first one I saw and the second one I saw. So I think that's another tangible one. he's able to provide, on a weekly basis, instant feedback about what my body was doing and how it was responding to certain things and things we could keep tweaking. But it was great because I was also getting weekly feedback about how I was progressing. So that was something actionable. So diet, acupuncture, chiropractor, functional medicine, sleep. I place sleep above everything else in my life. Now, I know when we have kids, that will change. But for now, I don't sacrifice anything for sleep. That is my number one priority. Then the supplements, then the food. But sleep has been huge, especially for healing my adrenals. And again, not bombarding the liver with outside toxins. So making sure that I'm getting high quality proteins. I do try to invest in organic produce as much as possible. I use really, natural products on my hair and skin and body and everything. Which has been fun because I've been able to make connections with local farmers and local, I got a soap lady at the farmer's market. It's great. I've been able to watch her daughter grow with her. And so it's helped me connect to the community and make those connections as well. So I think those were the most tangible kind of takeaways that I would say. And, in this whole process, make sure you make time for fun and joy and be silly and be creative and take time to laugh. So self-care isn't all about having a, militaristic routine. It's taking time to find joy. And, this journey is here for us to enjoy. And part of the perspective I've also gained is that, when you have difficulties, they're here to teach you something. They're here to open your eyes to something. So, if you are facing a hurdle, kind of see what the lesson is and extract that from it. So that's kind of my holistic perspective.
That is incredible. Thank you so much for taking us through that. There's so many different pieces. I think that what you touched on regarding your acupuncturist, I think that it's really important to always go into seeing a care provider of any type. So whether it's a naturopath, acupuncturist, medical doctor, fertility awareness educator, you want to go into it recognizing that, it is a profession, it is a field. And within that field, you're going to have individuals who specialize in different areas. And so every single naturopath is not the same and doesn't have the same specialization potentially in the area that you need support with. So I feel like it's always important to go in not thinking that this one practitioner is going to give you everything and know everything about everything, because nobody knows everything about everything. But I think it's really important to be realistic, to be willing to go to a different practitioner. And that can sometimes be a challenge because, you've invested time and money into this person. They kind of know you now. But I feel like it is really important to know that sometimes you do, even if the person is super nice, if they don't specialize in that area that you need, then it's you. You are the most important aspect of this process. So you need to go to the person who specializes in that area. So I think that's really important. And one of the questions that came to mind, you took us through the changes that you made. And I can really relate that throughout the past, say, 10 years of my life, I've made a number of the same changes that you've made. So in terms of cleaning up the household products, really cleaning up my beauty products, I went from all of these beauty products to one product. So now my beauty products is like coconut oil. Obviously, there's a couple more, but yeah. So I just want you to share a little bit with us just the context of time frame. So you're condensing a journey that you went through over a 4-year period very neatly into a lovely package for us. One of the pieces of feedback that I get quite a bit and something that comes up when I'm working with clients is, it's so overwhelming. When I talk about xenoestrogens, like that is a really overwhelming conversation because it's like you're surrounded, like they're everywhere. And maybe share with the listeners how you did it, because I know you didn't do it over a weekend.
Yes, no, that's such a huge point. You're right. First of all, I want to comment on it's important to build your team. I found that it takes more than one professional, medical healing professional. For a long time, I relied on one. And then I just had this moment. I was like, nope, I got to build a team. And my team went through a few iterations before it got to where it is now. So it's very important too. Even if they're really nice, listen to your gut and just say, you know what, this has been great. Thank you for everything you've given me. I'm moving in a different direction, and seek somebody else. That's been huge. And then in terms of, cleaning up your whole lifestyle to be more natural, thank you for mentioning the cleaning products, because that is something also I've transitioned around here in my home. I mean, this is years. This is one product at a time. And, until you find the right ones that you're going to replace things with, it can be you don't want it to be a huge waste of money or very expensive. So I would take time to do research on everything before I purchased it. But I think I started with body lotion. I just, I quit getting the stuff at the store and found ones. I think there's a rating scale. The name is escaping me. I think like the
Environmental Working Group.
Yes, that's it. So I started going on there to find the ratings of different body lotions, and found one that was more affordable that I've been using. So I started with body lotion, and then I think I switched deodorant, and, I started making connections at the farmer's market with different meat providers. And I would say, the real change started beginning in January 2015, and I'm still making changes. I still have regular, dishwasher soap that I'm waiting to empty to get through before I use the natural stuff. You have to make those decisions. Do I just throw it out, whatever's left, and buy something new, or do I use it up because I've already spent my money on it and then make the change? So, by no means do I have a perfect household yet, but that's okay. And that's part of this is, let go of that. Part of what I'm healing is that perfectionist personality. Just do the best you can, because if you focus on being perfect, I think I've heard you talk about this too. If you focus on being perfect, the stress of that is going to outweigh any other thing that you do in terms of buying the right product. So just give yourself a break, and, maybe 1 month at a time is, your deodorant starts to run out, start to look for natural ones. As your foundation for your makeup starts to run out, start to look for a different one, and just make it a transition process. Don't feel like you have to be perfect, and just know every little one change you make is going to make a difference. So don't feel like if you haven't made all of the changes yet, there's no benefit. Every little change makes an impact. So just work with it. Take that journey one step at a time, and just feel comfortable that you're taking it in the right direction.
I couldn't agree more. You said that beautifully. And I have a couple of questions to end our show today. One of them is looking back, if you could go, in a time machine and talk to your 22-year-old self, what would you want to tell yourself the most?
That kind of, to me, is like, what kind of wisdom have you gained from this experience that you want to share with those that are younger than you? And to me, two things. One is love yourself in every moment, because you're doing the very best you can in that moment with the information that you have. So just be forgiving. Just know that you're doing your best. And two, and this is kind of going back to my original email of reaching out to you after Dr. Miranda Naylor's episode, is don't just take a regular doctor's advice at face value. Do your own research, be your own advocate. And I wish that I had started looking at the natural way of living earlier. I wish I had gotten off birth control earlier to know that it was masking underlying conditions. I wish I had taken time to start feeding myself a nutritious diet earlier. I wish I had started learning about detoxing in a natural, I'm not talking about a detox cleanse, but just a natural detoxifying way of living to support your body's own processes. So, kind of the natural living, and then, the self-love.
And given everything that we've spoken about today, we've covered so much in such a short time. What is the one thing that you want the listeners to take from our conversation today?
Two things. I keep answering your one question with two things. If you're on birth control, that's an individual decision. But if you've been in it on a long time, I really strongly personally feel, because of my journey, it's important to get off of it for at least a little bit and see what your body naturally does. And then two, and this is the bigger message I hope to convey, and my whole reason of kind of bearing my soul on this podcast today in some capacity, is there's hope. There is hope. Our bodies are miraculous, and they can heal And if someone had even told me 6 months ago that my period was finally going to return after all this time, that's what I was striving towards. I didn't necessarily believe it. And that when it finally happened, it was such an overwhelming experience. But my biggest message is to convey my whole purpose is hope. Even if this podcast episode changes just one person's life and it gives them hope that all the efforts that they're making to improve their health, they will pay off. They will work. So just hang in there and keep it up. You're not alone.
Thank you for that. Your body can do it, ladies. You're not broken.
Yes.
Andrea, oh my goodness. Thank you so much for coming on the show. This has been just wonderful having you. Thank you so much for being so open, so vulnerable, so honest about your experience. I know this episode is going to help so many of our listeners, and I'm really excited to share it because I can't wait to hear what everyone has to say about it.
Thank you so much for having me. And I hope I was able to communicate my journey and, impactful things that people can hopefully implement in their own lives as best as possible. So thank you for the opportunity. I'm very grateful. And thank you for all the work that you do. Your podcast has made a huge difference in my life. And I'm so grateful that you started it and have shared so much wonderful information with the world.
Oh, thank you so much. That is so sweet. Oh my goodness. Oh, this has been so amazing. So if you want to get in touch with Andrea, you can contact me, info@fertilityfriday.com. And you can also find her in the private Facebook group that I host for the Fertility Friday community. So if you're new to the show and you're not in there, you can find us at fertilityfriday.com/community. That's the link, and you'll be directed to the Facebook group. So I hope to see you in there. And after I release this episode, I'll tag Andrea in the post, and we can certainly chat about our discussion today. So thanks again, Andrea, for being here. It was so much fun.
Thank you, Lisa.
Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed today's show, please do share it with a friend. Your iTunes app makes that super easy. You can just go in there and actually click on the little ... button, and it allows you to share either an episode or the whole podcast with someone who you think will benefit from it. You'll find the show notes page for today's episode at fertilityfriday.com/138. And I just wanted to say a special thank you again to Andrea for coming on the show and sharing her story. I was really compelled to bring her on the show and let her talk a little bit about what her experience was, because although it's not common to have a 4-year delay, that's a really long time if you've just come off of hormonal contraceptives. More of an average or a normal delay of return to having your period come back is more like 3 to 6 months. In some cases, it can be a bit longer, but 4 years is definitely outside of the norm. But it's important to create a space to share these stories because although it's not common, there are a number of women, and I would argue a growing number of women, who do fall outside of that kind of normal range and do experience a significantly delayed return of fertility. I mean, of course, there are women who come off hormonal contraceptives and get their periods back right in line just 2 weeks later, or 4 weeks later, I guess I should say. But I think it's important to discuss these things because ultimately, when you're coming off of hormonal contraceptives, you just don't know what's going to happen. I've had a number of clients who I've spoken to whose doctors have flat out told them that their periods will come back right away and they'll get pregnant right away. And I find that to be really scary that a doctor would be promising that. Although, many women do come off of the pill and do conceive right away, everyone does not. That is a fact. And so you just don't know how long it's going to take you. And there are a number of women who get their periods back. And so they're actually ovulating regularly and they're having their periods, but it takes them several cycles for them to conceive. And I think we all know that for some women, it takes over a year. And there's a number of different factors that could contribute to it. But at the end of the day, what we need to do is to really bring light to these issues, talk about them more, and to really get a sense of what the possibilities are. And it's only then that you can make an informed choice about how to manage your fertility and what to do when you get to that place where you're not ready to conceive yet, but you know that it's on the horizon for you. And so one of the things that I talk about a lot on the show, as my longtime listeners will know, is that the whole concept of really thinking about that. So if you know that you're wanting to start a family a couple years out, to really see if it's an option for you to jump off hormonal contraceptives a little bit earlier so that you give your body some time, because you don't know, is your fertility going to come back right away or is it going to take a little bit of time? If you're looking for additional support with charting, if you're wanting to be really comfortable learning fertility awareness, if you're struggling to figure out your own charts or what's happening with your cycle, or just looking to figure out the connection between what's happening in your menstrual cycle and your overall health and fertility, I would encourage you to check out the programs that I offer on my Work With Me page. So just head over to fertilityfriday.com/workwithme. And from that page, you can actually schedule your free 15-minute consultation with me if you have questions about the programs I offer and you just want some more information in that area. And so I just want to thank you again for hanging out with me today. I appreciate all of you for taking the time to tune in to the podcast and to support the show. I appreciate all of you for sharing the show and spreading the word. Your efforts are really helping me to get the word out and really make an impact so that more women can learn how their body works, learn how their menstrual cycles are really a key indicator of their overall health. I appreciate all of you for taking the time to tune into the podcast, for letting me be part of your day, for sharing the show with your friends, and for just helping me get the word out. So thanks again. And as always, until next time, be well and happy charting.